Okay, it's a minute after 1 and Ali started the recording. So let's get the meeting started. For those who are joining us for the first time and who I haven't met, welcome. My name is Lisa Helps and I am the executive lead for BC Build's project origination. From the BC Builds team, I've got with me Ali, who is our senior comms advisor. And from the city of Penticton, we have Stephen, who is ostensibly in charge of this project. So thanks for joining us for this second info session. For those of you who may have missed the first info session, if you are in the final throes of putting your proposal together, I'm sure you've watched that session. If you haven't, I encourage you to. It's up on the website. In addition, many of you have submitted multiple questions to us during this last few months, which we really appreciate. We've answered all the questions. They're posted online in the form of an updated property opportunity notice, and Ali will put a link to that property opportunity notice and all the updates into the chat. The purpose of today's info session is for Stephen to provide any further information, some of which has come up during the questions and some of which he may just wish to add to the original property opportunity notice, to help those of you who, as I said, are in the final throes of putting your proposals together, which are due by 11:45 p.m. on Friday, December the 19th. So that's the purpose of today's session. I'm not going to talk about what is BC Builds, about the program, about the Housing Development Opportunities Platform, et cetera, et cetera. All of that was covered in the first info session. We really are here today to provide additional information and most importantly, to answer your questions. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to, and having said that, we are obviously happy to answer questions about the BC Builds program and how to do a pro forma for this kind of project, et cetera, et cetera. But I'm just not going to do my usual BC Builds song and dance at the beginning of the info session. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Stephen. He'll walk us through his slides and then we'll open to questions. If you feel comfortable turning on your camera when you ask a question, that's great. If not, no worries. We are recording this session, as I noted at the beginning, and it too will be posted on the BC Builds website Penticton page over the next couple of days. So if there's anything that you miss, don't get the notes down quick enough, you can go and watch it online. Stephen, with that, I'm going to hand it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks, Lisa, and thanks everybody for attending today. Like Lisa mentioned, we felt that it'd be helpful to have this other public opportunity to just share some information and highlight some of the questions that we have been receiving. I think we recognize that people are at the stage now of kind of detailed concept design, and we've been getting quite a few questions directed to the city about how we interpret different elements of our zoning bylaw, how we consider certain things through the evaluation stage. So we have all those responses in the property opportunity notice addendums, like Lisa mentioned, on the BC Builds webpage. But I just felt it was helpful to maybe give an overview to the city's responses to that, the most common questions we've been receiving, and then also to provide a bit of a forum for Q&A on any other elements that people are running into or have questions about as they get into the last stages of kind of finalizing and tweaking their concept. So I don't have too many slides to share today, but I will just pull up a slide here that shows sort of the common questions that we've been receiving, and I can kind of outline some of the responses from the city's end, and hopefully that kind of kicks off maybe some additional questions that you might be thinking about or working through as you're working on your submission for this project. So a couple of the common questions we've received so far, these are shown on the slide here, and the questions and responses are included in the property opportunity notice addendum. We've gotten a few questions on kind of similar topics, so I've condensed it a little bit here to speak to some of the elements that are really within the city's realm of response with this project. So the first one is to do with parking. There's kind of a common theme question around parking requirements and reductions. So for this site, the zoning bylaw stipulates 1 parking space per unit, plus 1 visitor parking space for every 5 units, a ratio of 0.2 visitor parking spaces per unit. That's the standard across projects in this zone, the RM3 zone. We have recently changed our parking requirements elsewhere in the city, but that's the standard requirement that applies to development on this site. A few folks have asked about opportunities to vary that or reduce it. The response from the city is that we're open to some level of reduction. Typically, we do consider that provided there's additional amenities in the building or on the site that help support other modes. So often that's enhanced bike parking facilities, maybe a bike wash or repair station, certain features that just help encourage that mode share shift. This property is in a pretty good location for alternative modes. It's quite close to the downtown. It's actually right next to an interregional bus stop. There's a parking lot right beside. And a few people have noted quite a large city-owned parking lot right beside this subject property on Eckhardt Avenue. So opportunity there potentially for some unofficial overflow to some degree. But another thing to keep in mind is that there is quite limited street parking here. So there will just need to be some justification provided by the proponent team to help support any parking reduction that's being requested, and we can consider that a few different ways. If you haven't checked it out already, our zoning bylaw does include a couple elements that can be utilized to help reduce parking. One of them is additional bike parking. So for an additional five secure bike parking spaces, we could reduce the vehicle parking requirement by one. That can only be used once. So if you're to provide 10, it could be reduced by two, but that could help reduce it if you're quite close to the minimum requirement, but just not quite there. We also have a cash and loop program, or there could be a request come forward for just a variance to that requirement, again, provided that that justification is provided to the city and that there's some elements in the project to help support people shifting to another mode other than the private vehicle. We had a couple questions too about density. So the city did pre-zone this site for RM3, which is our medium density multiple housing zone. That zone is quite well aligned with the underlying future land use designation on this site, which we also updated recently as well through some larger scale updates last year. We are not opposed to considering additional height here, although we do feel like that 6-story build is the expectation of that zone and that area generally. But if there's a design that comes forward for slightly more than that, I think we'd be open to considering that through a zoning amendment. The spirit of the program is to have the land pre-zoned, and that just provides that assurance and helps support these speedy timelines going forward to construction on the site. So of course, working within the existing zone helps take away some of that additional process if we are looking at increasing density on the site from what was previously considered. But just in general, across Penticton, we've seen a lot of successful projects in the 5 to 6-story range, and I think the community is quite open to seeing projects of that scale. If we start getting over 6 stories, I know there's also implications for construction type and BC building code requirements that kick in, so additional considerations to consider. But we've had this question come up from a few proponents asking if they can maybe add on an additional story. It's not something that we're totally opposed to. We'd like to see how that fits with the design, and we'll help give an outline of the process forward if we are looking at that route. But definitely encourage folks to work within the current zoning, just in the spirit of the program as well, recognizing that it is aligned with our kind of larger future land use plan. And if there were an exception requested for additional height, there'd be a separate rezoning process to go through or zoning amendment specific to that site. And that would just impact the timeline a little bit for getting this project going forward. We had a question too about the childcare component. So when we put out the property opportunity notice, we did note that a preference from the city would be to see opportunity for childcare if it made sense with the project submission. This is an area of community need for sure. We have a childcare action plan that identifies the need for over 700 new childcare spaces in the city over the next number of years, and we've been making some progress on that, but definitely saw this as a good opportunity, especially given the target demographic as it being a workforce housing project to have childcare sort of co-located and help support those working families in community. So this is explained in the property opportunity notice addendum in a response in detail, but essentially the childcare component is not scored on its own. If all other things are equal in submissions, there may be preference given to the submission that also includes a childcare component, but doesn't have its own grading scheme as part of the review criteria. I'm not sure, Lisa, if I got that exact wording right, or if you wanted to add anything on that piece.
No, that's good.
Okay. The last question I have on here that was quite a common one that came forward was about our amenity space requirement. This is a general provision in our zoning bylaw that applies to all multifamily developments. So the minimum requirement is 20 square meters per dwelling unit, which we've heard from some folks who design in other communities is quite high. I did want to clarify, and this is in the property opportunity notice addendum as well, that the amenity space calculation includes both private amenity space per units as well as any shared amenity space within the building. So that 20 square meters doesn't have to be assigned for each unit. It just has to be provided in the development at that ratio. So it can include things like private unit balconies and decks, as well as any shared spaces like rooftop patio or outdoor community garden space or any indoor amenity spaces provided, such as gyms and that. We have a pretty good definition in our zoning bylaw that outlines the types of uses and features that we consider as amenity space, both indoor and outdoor examples listed. So for any clarity, definitely refer to those definitions within our zoning bylaw. And just a quick note as well to those on the call before I open it up to the group. We are aware that there's a couple older or outdated versions of our zoning bylaw kind of floating in the internet. So often people will look up in Google for our zoning bylaw or another search engine, and sometimes you're not finding the most up-to-date version. I definitely recommend to folks to access the zoning bylaw directly through our website on the bylaw directory page. That way you'll get the most updated information and you're working with our current zoning regulations. I say that because we've gone through quite a significant zoning bylaw update in the last year, and I just want to make sure that folks are working with the right zoning provisions because a lot of the information may look similar across different versions, but just wanted to highlight that as the right way to access the in effect regulations within our zoning bylaw currently. So just wanted to add that note, and maybe I'll stop sharing here, open it up to the chat here and see if there's any questions from those on the call.
Thanks, Stephen. Before we go to questions, I just wanted to add one thing, and yeah, please feel free to use the chat for questions, or you can turn on your camera and ask a question. Just going back to the question of zoning and whether there'd be a potential to increase the height or density. Obviously, that's within the purview of the city to do, but from BC Build's perspective, one of the criteria for having sites posted on the Housing Development Opportunities platform in the first place is that the city undertakes a zoning amendment to basically set the table for the BC Builds project that it wants to see. So again, it's up to the city whether it would entertain a rezoning, but I think there are points, quite significant points for speed to construction in the property opportunity notice evaluation. And obviously, if there were rezoning proposed, that would inevitably add time and probably lose points in that section against the baseline, which is the site is zoned for the development the city wants to see. So I'm just throwing that out there for information. Of course, it's up to the city whether it would entertain a rezoning to add height or density. But from BC Build's perspective, we asked the city to do their work. They did their work. They set the table for the project. And I think it would, yeah, just I pay attention to what each set of points is worth in the property opportunity notice, and the speed to construction is worth quite a bit. So, all right, with that, let's go to questions. And again, if you don't feel comfortable turning on your camera, the chat is fine. Okay, what funding is available in the pre-development phase prior to construction? I'll talk about that from the BC Builds perspective, and then Stephen can talk about it from the city's perspective. So once a successful proponent is selected, we will onboard through the creation of a project steering committee, which will be made up of BC Builds, the proponent, like the developer, builder, and owner operator, BC Builds, and the city. And within a couple of meetings, again, we're expecting submissions that are close to DP ready, or at least have the potential to turn into a development permit pretty quickly. The proponent will, at the first meeting, get instructions on how to apply for project development funding through BC Builds. It is a loan, not a grant, so it's a project development funding loan that is ostensibly taken out by the final mortgage when that time comes. It's a low interest loan. So yes, project development funding is available. It can be made available quite quickly. It's just an internal approval process at BC Builds, which once we have all the materials takes a few weeks, but it does take proponents a little while to amass all the materials. But if you've put together a really good proposal with a solid operating budget, a solid capital budget, the project development funding application is kind of half written by that point. So I think, Stephen, you might want to add something from the city's point of view.
Yeah, on the city side, we have an affordable housing pilot funding program. So this is a pilot pre-development funding scheme that was supported by council last year. It was for a 1-year period, so we're hoping to have that renewed for next year. But the opportunity would be there for the successful proponent of this BC Builds project to apply for some grant funding from the city to either help recoup some of the pre-development work that was done to submit for BC Builds or for some other related pre-development work before getting to construction. There's some details about that fund on our website. And like I mentioned, we'll be looking to council to have that pilot program extended. We've had some good success with it so far, and I think a really good uptake given the 1-year period. So we're definitely going to be asking for that to be extended. But of course, it is still a council decision to have that program extended, but that would be the intended use of it, and it would be available for folks to apply if they're the successful proponent of this BC Builds opportunity.
Yeah, and thanks to the city for making that available. That does help with the pre-development funding. In answer to the question about, I'll just read it out in case everyone's not in the chat. During the evaluation, what would score highest? Proposal with least variances or higher density with more variances? I'm just going to go to the property opportunity notice. I know all of you have looked at it, but just as a way to answer the question. So here's the Penticton property opportunity notice. You can see that financial viability is the highest number of points. And so if you think the only way that you can achieve those, a good score in this section is by proposing additional density. And there's a second follow-up question in the chat that Stephen will answer that might put further light on this one. If you think you absolutely need that extra density to have a really financially viable proposal, but you're going to lose points maybe on speed to construction. That's something for each proponent to weigh. Variances obviously are different than a rezoning. We have had projects that have come in through this stream for other cities where variances are part of the proposal. You've heard, I think, Stephen, really clearly on the parking variance. That seems to be the one that's coming up the most. So as you can see, we don't have scores for variances and scores for zoning, but the ones that I'll draw your attention to are weighing financial viability and sustainability against speed to market, because those are the two, I think, things that the evaluation committee will be looking at in weighing the answers to that question that was just asked in the chat. Stephen, I'll let you take the next one. I'll read it out, but we've got a quick question. Would the city be open to increasing the floor area ratio from 1.6 to 2.0 while still keeping the 6-level height limit? And would this require a rezoning?
Yeah, in that case, it would require a site-specific rezoning just to increase the density allowed on that site to go over that 1.6 floor area ratio. It's something that we could consider, and I think we'd evaluate based on the design that was submitted and the rationale and justification for that increase. But it would be a council decision through a site-specific application because we're allowing more density on the site than originally envisioned. And I'd encourage folks to review some of the exclusions from floor area ratio as well, because that might help the project get in under that 1.6 number too. So certain mechanical elements, the parkade, there's a few different components of the building that wouldn't count towards that maximum density number that could help achieve that amount. I'm thinking too, some folks have noted the lot coverage maximum or the hard surfacing maximum. Those may be challenging to meet as well with additional density allowed on the site. So we look at it as a complete package. And if there's a number of variances associated with it, I mean, we can outline a process forward. But like Lisa mentioned, any application on top of the current zoning does add a bit of time in processing. So just to consider that when submitting the application to make sure there's that value add and the trade-off there of yes, there's maybe more process time and maybe some uncertainty with council outcomes and decisions on this, but really demonstrating, I think, what the value is in going a bit above and beyond what the zoning bylaw currently allows.
Thanks, Stephen. Any other questions that people want to ask? And then I'm going to share an answer to a question that no one's asked yet, but it's something that's come up in our other evaluations. Okay, maybe I'll do that now while you folks are thinking about any other questions you might have. I'm going to bring up the property opportunity notice again. Again, this is also a learning process for us. BC Builds launched this housing development opportunities platform in April, and this is, I think, maybe the 8th or 9th or 9th, 10th or 11th site. So just on the scoring, we've done some debriefs with successful and unsuccessful proponents on other projects. And I just want to draw your attention. I know it's obvious, but all of these things here are worth 15. And so when you're putting your proposals together, you know, the amount of per unit grant, yes, we can grant up to $225,000 per unit, but a project that comes in requesting that amount of grant is going to get a really bad score, you know, very close to zero. Because that's our maximum. And this early in the process, if you're hitting that maximum, it means that by the time you get to construction, the project's no longer going to be viable. So we've seen some proponents put in a very high grant amount here, and then, you know, the score doesn't turn out that great, but they can hit target household incomes that are very, very low, or have more units at 20% below market. And I'll talk about this one specifically in a moment. And so just really want to draw your attention to the fact that each of these are worth 15 for a reason. We want you, when you're putting your proposals together, to balance, to try and strike a balance among all of these things. In future property opportunity notices, and we'll see some more come out during the new year, we've made this really clear. Percentage of units at 20% below market. Our baseline for BC Builds is 80% of units at market, 20% of units at 20% below market. We expect everyone to hit that. In fact, it's a qualifying criteria. So if you hit that 80-20, you don't get any points. You do get points if you can deliver, you know, 22% of units at 20% below market, or 25% of units, like kind of chipping away at that percentage of units below market. And then just again, I probably said this in the first session, but I'll say it again here. BC Builds is not a housing affordability program. And so if you're using, you know, for example, $220,000 per unit to achieve 40% of units at 40% below market, that's not our program. Our program is middle income workforce housing. You know, if you can do a little bit better than 20% below market, if you can get 20% of units to 25% below market, that's great. But, you know, we can't spend all the grant money to achieve deep affordability, because that's not the thrust of the program. Okay. We'll request, sorry, next one is, and this has been asked already and answered, but we'll ask it and answer it again here, I think. Will the request to use nearby parking for overflow/guest parking have an impact on development approval timeline?
Yeah, good question there. We had a chat about this internally, and I think looking at the parking beside, we wouldn't be able to dedicate those spaces for this project. So I think it would just be part of the argument for asking for a variance for this BC Build site on the number of parking spaces to be provided on the site, is saying that there is a city-owned parking lot beside, but we wouldn't be able to allocate those spaces to kind of make up that difference. So it would still be a variance request going forward, unless it could be met through one of the other routes in the zoning bylaw. And if it is a variance request, depending on the number, it could be approved by staff or it could be approved by council. We do have some variance approval with delegated authority to staff if it's sort of minor enough, but if it crosses a certain threshold, then it is a council decision. So encourage folks to review that and kind of see like what number you're working with an on-site parking reduction. But even with the city-owned site beside as a parking lot, we wouldn't be able to reserve those spaces for this project. They'd still remain open to the public. And for those maybe not familiar with the site, that lot actually is quite heavily used during specific events at the arena right beside. So while it's quite empty a lot of the time, it is quite busy during some overflow parking and some major events at the nearby South Okanagan Event Center. Hence being the reason why we're not looking to sort of allocate any of those spaces to this project at this time. So we're hoping to see a proposal come forward, meeting the zoning requirements, or at least getting as close as possible to those expectations kind of set blanket across different projects in that zone.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. That's really helpful. And yeah, Roman, thanks for the thanks. It is good to have this clarification. So basically, the city does not want to use its public parking for this private site. So if you're considering transportation demand management measures, and to be clear, this is what we're not accepting development proposals. You don't need to come out with a fully fleshed out transportation demand management plan saying you're going to have this number of bike parking in exchange for this number. That comes later. Like that is part of the development process. But we do want to see, if and I particularly the city wants to see if you are proposing to vary parking, some rationale for so doing, and some of the measures that you'd propose to put in place. But a full on TDM proposal is not necessary at this point. That's too much for what we're asking. All right, we still do have some time left, and I want to make sure that everyone's questions are answered. So if you want to ask a question of Stephen or I, please do so now, either by raising your hand or putting it in the chat. Okay, I'm going to do another check. Any final questions? Okay, someone is saying thanking us for all the additional information. You are most welcome. Thanks for taking the time to come.
I'm wondering, Lisa, if we wanted to highlight the deadline extension.
I sure do. Yeah, I see someone else typing in the chat. Well, maybe I'll do that now. Yeah, so this proposal has been at your request collectively, those who are submitting proposals extended to December the 19th at 11:45 p.m. That's when it closes. You can send, as it says in the property opportunity notice, info@bcbuildshomes.ca. The proposals will be gathered up there. Anything that comes in after 11:45 p.m. is not eligible. So don't wait till that late anyway. It's almost the holiday season. And then in terms of what happens after that, and I know I outlined this in the first session, but I may as well do it again here. We will receive the proposals. BC Builds will check them for eligibility. And again, there's a difference between the eligibility criteria, which is clearly outlined in the property opportunity notice. Do you have experience? Are you in good corporate standing? Do you meet the equity requirements? Do you meet the household incomes? And maybe one other thing. So that we'll do the first check. Are these proponents all eligible? If the answer is yes, then we will begin an evaluation process, which is an evaluation committee comprised of 3 members from BC Build's team and 2 members from the city's team. Depending on the number of proposals, it probably will take us a month to 6 weeks to evaluate. Well, and don't count those last 2 weeks of December where everyone's going to be holidaying. And then we will notify the successful proponent, invite them to sign a conditional land contribution letter between ourselves, Penticton, and the successful builder, developer, owner, operator. And basically at that point, we all commit to getting this project under construction within a year of the letter being signed. And then after that is signed, we will notify the unsuccessful proponents and invite anyone that wasn't successful to do a debrief with us to learn more about how to do better in the future. Tony, I think I hopefully anticipated your question and answered it while you were typing. another question here. If the project needs to go through rezoning, what's the typical timeline for review? Would the project be expedited? And what's the usual timeline for securing development permit and building permit? Okay, so let's take those as two separate questions. So first on the rezoning, and then secondly on the DP and BP.
Yeah, good questions about the timelines there. We run our averages quite regularly. So right now for rezonings, for a typical rezoning, we're averaging about 3 months process time. And that's for all types. So we would work as much as we can to expedite this development application, given the nature of it going through BC Builds and really wanting to see some action on the site in the near future. So that's our average for rezoning. With development permit, those are generally around the 2 to 3 month timeline, and some of that depends a little bit on back and forth with the consultants involved. I think having a lot of this information available up front really helps avoid some of the questions or surprises that come up through the process, trying to eliminate those as much as possible. Plus, we have a really strong technical review process once we get that development permit application in, where we have a complete group of staff from different areas of the city that provide that feedback. So both comments related to the development permit as it goes forward for council approval, as well as a lot of comments that relate to the future building permit stage so that the group is well informed of what's coming at that next approval step. And I see the building permit approval question in there as well. Our typical building permit for a project like this does run around 8 weeks generally from submission to approval. And again, some of that depending on how much back and forth is needed with the consultants involved. So those are our approximate timelines. I know compared to a lot of major cities in other parts of the province, those are quite strong timelines, and we have a pretty well-resourced team as well. I mentioned at the start that we are seeing quite a few development projects of this scale in Penticton, so it's not something that we're not used to. We have really good level 3 building officials on staff and quite qualified folks in our planning and development engineering teams who work with projects like this all the time. So I think that level of experience helps come from the city and helps make the process as smooth as possible when you're going through these stages.
Great. Yeah, thanks. Yeah, I'm really impressed with the work that Penticton's doing. And Stephen, you know this already, but worth telling these folks as well, the property opportunity notice that they're working off of is our gold star standard. You know, you did have the advantage of 8 groups going before you and coming in wherever we are, 9th or 10th here with our properties listed. But yeah, I wanted to thank you for being such a good partner for BC Builds. Okay, I see that Roman is typing, so we'll stay here to get any more questions that come up. Again, feel free to put them in the chat or ask them using your camera, and we want to get everyone's questions answered before we head off today.
And maybe just as that question is coming in, I wanted to highlight too that we have a really valuable development engineering memo attached to the property opportunity notice. So definitely encourage folks to look through that in detail because there's some elements that are related to offsite works. There's a couple comments in there related to this being an MOTI controlled access road. So definitely some valuable information in there that hopefully allows the team to get ahead of some of uh, those things. So definitely encourage people to review that again in detail if you haven't already.
Roman was just saying thank you. Thanks, Roman, for your thanks. Yeah, we're very happy to have this follow-up session. It was Stephen's idea. It's a great idea. There've been lots of interest in this property, so we wanted to make sure we had a chance to share anything further. Just a reminder, if you do have any further questions after today, please direct them to info@bcbuildshomes.ca. That's in the property opportunity notice, not to the city. Our job is to make it easy for the city to batch everything we can and then send it their way. And it also provides great transparency if everyone comes right through us. So any further questions, we're still happy to answer them. And again, submissions are due 11:45 p.m. to info@bcbuildshomes.ca on December the 19th. And then you can all go and have a good holiday. And then we'll be in touch in the new year. I don't want to hang up before everyone's had a chance to ask anything they need to ask. So I'm going to do the 1, 2, 3 first call for any final questions in the chat or with cameras. And second final call. And third final call. Okay, great. This info session will be up. Ali will probably send you all a note when it is. Ali, I think it's actually a good idea that we send the link to the recording to everyone who signed up today, but also to everybody who's on our Penticton list so that everyone has the info. Okay, great. And the video will be up within the next couple of days, thanks to our awesome web team. Okay, thanks everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday afternoon.
Thank you so much.
Awesome. Thank you. Have a good day, everybody.
Bye.